Mr. Danielson will be filming us today. So thank you for being here, Bruce.
Okay, it's 3 p.m. I'll call to order the special meeting of the Board of Ethics for the City of Sioux Falls. First item of business will be the approval of minutes from our September 28th meeting. You have those minutes in front of you. Any additions, corrections, or additions, or a motion to approve as is?
Move approval of the minutes of the September 28th meeting as submitted.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify aye.
Aye.
Motion passed, minutes are approved. Item 3 is the business of pending issues. We do have a single complaint filed, 17A. You do have copies of the complaint and respondents' comments regarding conflicts of interest, potential conflict of interest for a member of the Charter Revision Commission who is married to a mayoral candidate. And you have the complaint form. I'm going to ask our attorney, the city attorney works for, in this case, the Board of Ethics. So I'm going to ask David for a quick overview of our duties and responsibilities relative to this specific type of assertion.
Sure. Just briefly, again, yeah, those are provided copies for the public. The complaint alleges that Jill Entenman, who has waived confidentiality as the accused, complaint was filed by Bruce Danielson. It was filed too late for us to make your regular meeting, so hence we had to call this special meeting. We appreciate your service as citizen volunteers. This is a complaint alleging that the conflict of interest for Jill Entenman, who is, as the chair said, the spouse of a mayoral candidate to serve on the Charter Revision Commission. It's seeking a ruling by the board and asking whether Ms. Entenman should step down as a member of the Charter Revision Commission. A few of you probably haven't been through the complaint process. We do an advice of rights, and that was attached to the public documents as well. And we give the accused, Ms. Entenman, in terms of the ability under ordinance to waive confidentiality, which she did, and then she's also provided her rights regarding the process and what could happen, and in particular, to bring witnesses, bring other evidence, etc. And then she also provided a statement, and you've all been given a copy of that, and we've also provided that to the public. Then briefly, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'll just kind of go over the ethics ordinances that pertain to this item. This would be, there's 2 parts of our ethics ordinances. One governs city employees and board members. The other one deals with elected officials. They're very similar in several respects, but there are some nuances between the 2. The one to keep in mind is that for citizen board members, they're subject to the same ethical rules that a citizen employee would, so they're considered almost like a public official. The types of things that would be conflicts of interests under Chapter 35, it would be such as, I'll read the definition of financial interest under that part. An expectation of receiving a pecuniary benefit. Financial interest of a person includes any financial interest of a member of that person's immediate family. A person has a financial interest in an organization in which that person has an ownership interest or is a director, officer, employee. A person has a financial interest in a decision if a financial interest of that person will vary with the outcome of the decision. And then it also goes on, financial interest does not include the following: an action or influence which would have an insignificant or conjectural effect on the matter. Question: immediate family does include the spouse. The prohibition on conflicts of interest under 35.028 says under Part A, no officer or employee of the city, that would include a board member, shall knowingly have a financial interest clearly separate from that of the general public in any contract, transaction, zoning decision, or other matter which is subject to an official act or services of the city. In this instance, the other prohibitions are acceptance of gifts and other value. I would not deem that would be appropriate to your inquiry here today. again, the complaint procedure is discussed in 35009. The board makes an initial review of the complaint, which is what we're here for today. You first need to decide if you have jurisdiction to hear the complaint. That essentially means have we received a complaint that's been notarized and gives you sufficient facts along with whatever testimony the complaining party would provide for you to make a ruling. The accused, Ms. Entenmann, is given an opportunity under ordinance to contest jurisdiction. She has not done that. So I think the jurisdiction issue should be fairly easy to discuss and determine. And then the board, according to your bylaws and procedures, goes forth and asks the complaining party, Mr. Danielson, to provide any additional information or witnesses to the board. And then Ms. Entenmann would be given that same opportunity. Then I will certainly, I have pulled a few public documents that I think will amplify your decision today, and we've also placed copies of those on the back table for the public, and we pass those out right at the meeting here today for you. And I would, amplify whatever you need to kind of get some more background. So that's where we're at.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Feifley. So our first order of business for the board is to determine whether or not, in fact, a complaint has been filed. We've pointed out that it has. So the first question is, do we have jurisdiction to handle that? And I'd like comments and or a motion to indicate we do or we don't, or general conversation.
I move that we accept that we have jurisdiction in this matter.
Any comments or thoughts?
I do have a question. Is this a complaint or is it asking for an advisory opinion?
I think
Is it
that's
the
a
same
good
thing?
question, and I intended to handle that immediately after we determine whether or not we have jurisdiction. So the
Okay.
order would be, first, do we have jurisdiction, and then second, what is it?
Okay.
Okay?
Second motion.
Any other thoughts or comments? We have a motion and a second to acknowledge jurisdiction. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The board has accepted jurisdiction. And now on to your comment about whether this is a complaint or hypothetical, whether or not there's a violation of an ethical violation simply by serving on the board, or whether or not that's a potential to serve. Talk about that.
Yeah, I guess my experience on the board, we had another instance where you were asked for an opinion, an advisory opinion. Could this present a problem? And to me, this reads in a similar way. Could this situation that we have in front of us present a problem? And so my question is, do we handle this like a complaint of something that somebody did, or do we handle it as an advisory opinion? And if so, is there a difference in how we would handle those two things?
The chair doesn't believe that there is a substantial difference in how we would handle that. We are, in either case, we're going to hear the complaint. We're going to hear the complainant, we're going to hear the respondent, and we're going to have discussion. That discussion and the outcome of that discussion may vary, but I don't think the process will vary. Is that fair?
I appreciate
So if I may, sorry, go ahead, Jeff, sorry. Okay, I would agree, Mr. Chairman, with that. And in terms of the powers and duties of the Board of Ethics under 35.010, it talks about that you can either initiate or receive complaints, but it also says you, sua sponte, you on your own, can issue an advisory opinion. So I would agree with the chair that if you go through this initial review, taking testimony from the parties and determine whether you believe it's a complaint or if you want to issue an advisory opinion, you can, under 35.010 subpart L, issue and render an advisory opinion for any matters relating to a city employee or a citizen board member. So you would have a lot of discretion at the end on how you want to fashion. And that'll be part of my discussion when you're done with
Yeah.
yours.
So a clarification, if it were an advisory opinion that simply says to the respondent, if you do what this says, and there is a complaint filed, you may well be found guilty of an ethics violation, or you may well not be. Okay. But it, yeah, it's just in terms of
Mr. Chair, just one question on that point to follow up with Wanda. That I'm looking at the board's rules, section 2.2, 2.02 under advisory opinions. There is a provision under, actually it's 2.03, where we can't give hypothetical. We can't address hypothetical questions. So to Wanda's point, I mean, do we have sufficient facts that have been alleged that go beyond anything but hypothetical? We're talking about the potential for something. And perhaps this gets flushed out as we listen to the facts. But I do think we need to be mindful of whether there is a legitimate, or I should say, a true conflict placed before us, even for an advisory opinion.
Can you opine on you said we have a conflict there because we have a prohibition against hypotheticals, but we also have advisory opinions, and somehow those seem to be, if not the same, very close to the same.
Each board's kind of had their, as I've seen over the years, each board member kind of has their own view of what is a hypothetical versus what is something that's appropriate for an advisory opinion. And to the extent I think that the ordinances say you can render an advisory opinion on your own, I would say that would go beyond what your bylaws say in terms of if you feel it's appropriate to enter an advisory opinion on it. That would, but again, I agree with the other comments. Let the testimony flush out first, and that'd be good discussion.
Any other discussion among the board members before we entertain testimony? If not, Mr. Danielson, as the complainant, would you care to offer testimony?
I'm Bruce Danielson. This is actually my fourth appearance here before the board, and I appreciate what the question that was just raised, because that's the way I wanted to start out what I've written. This is filed as an ethics question, not a complaint. This question has been filed in the name of clarity, not to hurt any person's integrity. Our campaign and ethics laws in South Dakota and Sioux Falls are very weak. This is why I've asked a simple question voters need answered for the integrity of the process. Excuse me. Our ethics processes are nationally known to be very weak and flawed. Why are we not able to ask a question versus having to lodge a complaint? One of my first issues in this whole process was the form. It says a complaint form. I've never met Ms. Entenman, never talked to her husband. I don't have, it was wrong for me to file a complaint, but it's the only form that's there. And so I asked that form be adjusted. So I filed this as a clarity question. So once again, I made this filing to ask an ethics question, not to file a complaint. We need a process to ponder the ramifications of a potential ethics issue before it is a problem needing an ethics challenge. This filing is not intended to set up a gotcha moment. Gotcha moments are not acceptable in ethics. Either the question is ethical or not. The action is either ethical or not, and that's a very simple, basic thought. We ask a simple question and it leads to our meeting here today. I'm standing here today to ask a question only this board is charged with answering. Few citizens feel comfortable coming to this board because we have to accuse someone of a problem when in fact we want to hold this board out as the arbiter of ethics. My question is not an accusation. My question is being presented to possibly prevent an accusation. Some of us watch this board meet quarterly without an agenda to consider. Either we have an incredibly ethical form of government with extremely ethical participants, or we are a citizenry without a means to ask basic questions of process. Recently, more citizens are asking questions about process and decisions because the government is deciding without asking us to take part. Why not answer a question before the issue comes up? What do we citizens have to do other than file an ethics complaint when in fact we ask this board for guidance? Today I'm not targeting any one person, only a potential issue. As an example, let's say Mary Smith is running for office in Sioux Falls. Mary has a family member, Bob, appointed to a city board. Mary's campaign has a particular theme or plan? What would stop Bob from promoting board decisions favorable to Mary's campaign? This has not happened in today's question, but it could. Also, the board in question is not the sole basis for this meeting today. We could be discussing the membership on the Park and Recreation Board, Planning Commission, and many others. City boards are set up to help the city council, mayor, and public make unbiased decisions for our leaders to base votes and policy affecting all of us. Let's consider what an ethics board could be deciding if the process was open to allowing questions to be discussed in an open forum without the necessity of an accusation. What about public leaders not telling the truth about an issue? Is it ethical to have secret agreements to hide questionably legal arrangements? What about confidentiality agreements with vendors? Is it right or ethical to have secret committees making decisions to give an administration some type of legal cover? Does an administration or board have the right to withhold information about a subject they might be embarrassed about? What if an ambulance is called? Why is it ethical to allow a board to allow phantom ambulances to be sent in order to fool the public? What if a city official injures a citizen in a public meeting? Does a member of a prestigious board have the ethical right to recruit a service into the community to destroy already established local businesses? Let's say a member of a board advocates for a service and then decides it might be a good part-time job. What if a board member does not recuse from a vote their business partner, contractor, or employer has an interest in? If the board member's spouse is elected, what guidance does the board give the individual to stay or resign membership from the city board? You know, I could ask a lot more questions, and how many more questions should we ask to get answers? The ability to move or promote a Mary Smith campaign issue or control the campaign news cycle from the committee assignment should be a concern to all. Nowhere in this ethics review question do I say this is happening, only the possibility that it could happen. The potential for this could be a problem that lays in the future. We're a town with about 250 citizens like yourselves who are appointed to upwards of 47 different boards. Where is the stopgap to prevent an abuse of privilege we grant to sit on one of these boards? So the question should be asked, so I'm asking it. Where is the propriety of a family member sitting on a committee where there might be an appearance of conflict or bias? And I'm only talking appearance of conflict or bias. In the future, this year or in future years, there might be an appearance of promoting a campaign's favorite ballot issue or position to enhance electoral chances. The potential of advocating from a city committee for a family member's campaign should be considered an ethics issue. Once again, this issue is not being raised to question any one person's commitment to the well-being of Sioux Falls. Only it is raised to help our policymakers decide what to do. This also allows the citizen to make more informed decisions about the process running our civic lives. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Danielson. Any members of the board have any questions for Mr. Danielson?
Mr. Danielson, my question is this. Are you asking for an opinion whether a conflict exists today because a member of a citizen board is married to a mayoral candidate, or are you asking us to look ahead in the event that Mr. Entman were to be elected mayor to address whether there would be a conflict of interest for his wife to then serve on a citizen board? So are you asking about the situation today or the potential situation a little over a year from now next year when the mayoral race is decided?
Actually, it's part of both. You know, it really is. And I hold no accusations towards their civic life. They've done a lot for the community. So I'm sorry it has to be, you know, anybody that I had to fill out a form for, because I never asked for a complaint form, but it's the only one that's out there. So I'm asking for an advisory position. We have the fact that, you know, she is on a board. I don't hold that against her. I'm proud that people do take part in the system. The only reason why I'm here today is because I like to be part of the system. I may do it from the outside, but I worked with one of the board members here on a commission a few years ago that we did a lot of good things to help the area, and I'm very proud of that work. I know that she wants to do her best job. But it still comes down to when the people who don't come into this room or don't go into Carnegie or don't, even visit City Hall in any way, shape, or form are looking at it from the outside and they're saying, well, why should all of those people keep making all those decisions? Or, these are the things that we're hearing. This is the potential that could happen. And, why not address that issue also as, what advice could this committee do to pass it on to the city council to make a change in how the boards and commissions are set up?
Thank you.
Any follow-ups?
Yeah, this maybe follows a little bit on what Jack asked. Mr. Danielson, on the complaint, which I understand you did not intend as a complaint, the very last sentence in there, should Ms. Emmington step down from membership so the mayor council vote on a replacement in time? My question was, in time for what?
Well, because right now they're in the decision-making process on what needs to be before the charter, to be put on the ballot. There are 6 meetings that I believe they have for the Charter Revision Commission, and they've already had the first organizing one, and so there'll be 5 more to finish the process. And if this commission, if this board decides that the commission membership would do well to change, that's why I tried to get it in as quickly as I could, so it doesn't create a burden on the remaining members.
So just to clarify, before the Charter Revision Commission would vote on any amendments they want to
Right.
propose to the 2008, for the 2018 election.
Right. There's
That's
testimony
what-
that's being held
Okay,
starting in a few weeks, so
okay, thank you.
you bet.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? Mr. Danielson, in your statement, you mentioned that one of the scenarios could be a board member who would face an issue that created a conflict and not recuse himself or herself. Are you asking us for an opinion on that point? So, for example, in this current case, Mrs. Entman, if she serves on this board or continues, is faced with a charter revision recommendation to go to the council that would somehow impact the mayoral election if she recuses herself. Would that be?
That would be something that the board might need to ask her, how she would deal with such a thing.
Do you believe that's an appropriate way for someone on the board to address a potential conflict that could arise in the future?
Well, that's one of the possibilities that could be done. I haven't seen it in any of the charter revision meetings I've been in, and I've seen it only in a few meetings that I know that, from my experience, sitting in a lot of meetings, that there have been issues in the past and people haven't recused themselves that I thought they probably should have. And I'm asking, is that something that this board would recommend? Or during this session of the Charter Revision Commission, is that something that you might recommend, stepping aside until after the election and the determination of the election, and then you move on to the, because her term would expire in 2019, maybe that's something that she could do, is they would have a stand-in. I've never seen it, but it's a question.
May I ask one more? Is there a specific charter section that concerns you the most? So, for example, if the committee or commission would make a recommendation about a section in the charter, does some create a greater conflict in your opinion than others?
No, because I've actually seen a lot of holes in the charter all the way around, and that's why I asked these questions. So I intend to probably bring some more questions back, as I've stated in there that it's a possibility I'll be back asking more of these, because we're finding more and more things where there needs to be some kind of a decision, and since we can't get it through the mayor's office and the council on these things, then this is the board where you are the arbiters of ethics, apparently, in Sioux Falls, and so it's the only place we have to go to ask these questions and to try and get some answers.
Any additional questions? Hearing none, we'll ask the respondent for testimony. Is that Ms. Intiman?
You should all have my copy of my statement. I just want to stress that the board I participate on does not have final decision-making authority. We make recommendation for action by others. We pass our suggestions by the city council, and then it goes to a vote of the people. I've spent quite a bit of time lately trying to think about how I could make an influence on, to help somebody, or more importantly, to harm someone. And I just have not been able to think of a scenario of that type since the decisions are made by the people.
Thank you. Any questions or comments regarding Ms. Emily's testimony?
I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to make sure, and this may be a question for Mr. Fifley. When the Charter Commission recommends a charter amendment, does the city council have the right to say yes or no, or does it automatically goes on the ballot?
Automatically.
Okay, so the commission has the power to send things to the ballot, but then they're not approved unless they're approved by the voters.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And for clarity, the commission has a requirement that the supermajority of them, that means 4 of the 5 of them, vote yes, that it should be on the ballot, so.
Okay.
That's kind of maybe my question. So, Ms. Enderman, have you ever recused yourself from a vote of your commission, or have you experienced others saying, no, I'm not going to vote on this issue because it may present a conflict?
I'm a relatively new member of that committee, so we've only participated in one election cycle. So at that time, I had no reason. My husband was not politically involved at that time, and most likely was true of the other members of the committee. So no, I haven't seen that happen.
Yes, a couple of questions.
Mrs. Enderman, during your tenure on the board, has there been any recommendations made, on the commission, has there been any recommendations that have been made to the council? For
Yes.
charter revisions?
Yeah. They pass it by the council.
What kinds of changes have been recommended thus far?
What we worked on, we had one, if a council member must come in to serve a partial term, he or she can then run for 2 more full terms. That went to the vote of the people. It passed by 66%. We also made an amendment that would allow any new mayor serving after Mayor Huther's term ends in 2018 to be enrolled in the South Dakota retirement system rather than the city pension system. That passed 72% to 28%. An amendment that rather than citing the specific year that the city does recodify its city ordinances, it'll simply state it'll follow state law and recodify every 20 years. That passed by 81%. If a mayor is appointed to finish an unexpired term, after he or she finishes that term, he or she can then run for 2 more full terms, but that's only if the unfinished term is already at least 50% complete. That passed by 60%. This amendment, another amendment would make all 12 city department directors subject to the advice and consent of the city council after the appointment by the mayor. That passed by 72%. And then we addressed terminology regarding sexual orientation, meaning some of the wording and saying that you cannot use that as grounds to terminate someone's employment. And it changed the word handicap to disability, prohibiting favoritism or discrimination in any city employment position. And that amendment passed by 76%. I have copies of these if anybody wants them.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions questions?
I have one, Mrs. Intiman, if you were on the board and you were faced with reviewing a portion of the charter that addressed either the mayor's responsibilities or how the mayor is elected, would you recuse yourself?
Most likely if that came up. But once again, we are dealing with hypothetical. And I almost feel that if I did something unethical, then it should be addressed. I'm having a little bit of a problem sitting here and having what ifs presented to me, because, you know, like I said, I've only been on there for one session. And another interesting thing is, if I were involved in something that went to the ballot, it wouldn't be a fact by the time my husband is running for election. He's going to be on the same ballot. So that's an interesting facet as well. But I've also always felt that if there's any suggestion of impropriety, yes, I would recuse myself.
Thank you. Any others? Hearing no other questions, thank you, Mr. Danielson and Ms. Engelman for your,
I'm sorry.
I said thank you for your testimony and for presenting the question. The order of business now for the board is to first determine whether or not we have a complaint or we have a request for advisory opinion. And I think Mr. Danielson was pretty specific on that. So I'd like a motion to at least memorialize that we recognize that we don't have a complaint, but rather a question for an advisory opinion. Is that correct, David?
Again, Mr. Chairman, under 35010 Part L, I think you would have the ability as the board in your discretion, if you want to convert this to an advisory opinion request, you certainly could do so.
So,
I move that we acknowledge that this is not a complaint, but is a request for an advisory opinion.
we have a motion and a second. Any questions or comments? Call for the question. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
We will handle this matter as a request for opinion. I'll open it for discussion as to how we might frame that, and if we should. The questions are, prior boards have refused to answer hypothetical questions. Prior boards have also given guidance on other advisory type questions, so it's pretty much the board's choice. It's open for discussion. Dave, is there anything you'd like to add to frame that before we begin our discussion?
I just would like to, at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman, just kind of talk about the three documents that I have that I think will provide some additional background for the
That's
board.
exactly where we can
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, may I raise a question? Mr. Feigley? Mr. Feigley, can you address what is in the current statute, section 35? Is there anything there that addresses limitations, prohibitions, restrictions regarding relatives of elected city officials serving on citizen boards or even being employed by the city?
Mr. Marsh, the only items were what I had already read as far as conflicts of interest for board members, and those are of a financial nature, which I would submit doesn't really apply here. And the other one is the acceptance of gifts and other things of value. So the item that you're really looking at is the charter section, part 7, that talks about avoiding an appearance of impropriety. That's really the inquiry that you have today, rather than under chapter 35.
There's no prohibition or regulation on the mayor or a council member and also having a relative either employed by the city or appointed to a city position, including citizen boards?
No, and there's been advisory opinions over the years that have talked about, I can't remember the exact section in there, but I mean, you can have an instance where you have an elected official and you have an actual paid city employee, and as long as they are not having direct supervisory authority over that family member that's an employee, it was deemed appropriate. So in this instance, I would submit the Charter Revision Commission does their own thing, so to speak, and that answers your question.
Can you go back, Mr. Feifley, and review the section regarding the appearance of impropriety? And I'd like to make sure that we all keep in mind that we have an actual impropriety, which would be a complaint, and the appearance of impropriety, which gets into the gray area of advisory.
I do not have the charter section with me, but I know it says it should avoid the appearance of impropriety under section 7, and that ordinances will be adopted by the council kind of in relation to that. And this board has frequently addressed that issue in each circumstance is unique.
I know.
Sorry, that's the best answer I could give, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
If I could I amplify kind
Yes.
of what the documents are? And again, those are available at the back table. The first item, just to give this board a little more background information, the first one is resolution number 15-15. That just shows the date of Ms. Entenmann's term. So she would have been appointed with the advice and consent of the council at that time on March 17 of 2015. Just serve a term from March 2015. March 2015 through March 2019. The second document on there is pulled also from the city website. It's a statement of organization filed by Jim Entenmann for Sioux Falls as a candidate for mayor. That was filed March 21, 2017. So you'll note a 2-year lapse in time from the moment that Ms. Entenmann was appointed on the commission until there was a statement of organization for a mayoral race filed by her spouse. And the third item, apologies, that's the best we could make it for readability, is election data from the time in which the charter was enacted in September of 1994 up until the 2016 election. The mayoral race years are 1994, 1998, 2002, 2006, 2010, and 2014. If you want to mark those, I should have marked those on that. But what this public data shows in terms of the number of amendments that are proposed by the Charter Revision Commission, and again, the commission has proposed since their inception 47 potential amendments to the charter. 46 of the 47 have been approved by the voters, and as Ms. Entenmann said, in the last election, those were high majorities of people that were in favor of those amendments on a whole sort of housekeeping and other items relating to the charter. But you'll notice in the mayoral years versus the off-mayor election years that the voter turnout is much less in the non-mayoral race years. And I think probably the theme you could garner from the election data is what really drives voter turnout is whether there's a mayoral election and not whether a particular charter amendment is in place. I would, pardon the pun, the sexiest issue we've ever had for a charter amendment was the sexual orientation item in the last election, and we had one of the worst turnouts we've ever had with only 11% turnout. So I don't believe that the Charter Revision Commission, based on the data, it doesn't show that really drives voter turnout, unfortunately. So in terms of anything else, I'd be happy to answer it. So.
Other questions or comments? determination from the board as to whether or not we wish to proceed with issuing an advisory opinion, or we decide that we're not going to address a hypothetical question. So, is there comments or questions or a motion from the board?
Well, based on what Mr. Feige said, it doesn't appear to me that by statute that a conflict of interest exists because of the membership of a relative or spouse of an elected city official. So we may want to clarify or reaffirm that we do not see an inherent conflict of interest through that membership on a citizen board, specifically the Charter Commission. That doesn't mean that a conflict could not arise that might call for recusal on a vote, but the membership itself, it seems to me, Mr. Feifel, you can clarify, misinterpret this, but it doesn't seem to me that there's any basis here for declaring a conflict of interest either now, when the spouse is a candidate, or in the event that the candidate is elected come next spring.
I agree. I'm having a hard time. I maybe need more specific what ifs, hypotheticals, what if this, what if that. I'm having a hard time connecting the dots that, someone who serves on that Charter Revision Commission could influence an election. I'm just having a hard time coming up with scenarios where that would be possible in my mind. And I'm having a hard time assuming that somebody wouldn't then recuse themselves if it were to present a conflict. So I'm in agreement with what you concluded, Jeff.
Jack, maybe I'll just add a point. And I don't think we disagree at all. I do think that what I heard from Mr. Danielson is enough evidence to take this out of a pure hypothetical. I do think that the fact is that a member of a board has a spouse or family member running for mayor creates an actual situation that's not just a what if this happens in the future. And I think that then lends us to at least consider this from an advisory opinion on what those board members should do, or commission members, in the event that something comes up in the future. And as Wanda said, to recuse themselves so that they can avoid that appearance of impropriety.
Could I want to advise on that, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I think the one issue with the financial conflict of interest that would, in my estimation, would be a clear conflict is on section 2.04 of the charter on elected official compensation. If Ms. Entenmann were the driving force regarding increasing that pay, it could, if her husband succeeds in the election, it could have a financial benefit to her spouse, and that's in essence tied to her as well. So that would be a clear instance where a recusal would be necessary.
Right. So,
And I'm going to make another point too, which is, maybe a little bit different than the point I just made. It's interesting to me how the recommendations are overwhelmingly adopted. And I'm not suggesting that people don't pay attention to what they vote for, but it seems like it tends to happen that if the Charter Revision Commission does recommend something, that it tends to be adopted. So I think that's interesting. I think that while they're not a legislative body, they certainly do seem, because of the numbers, to have an influence on the outcome. I mean, maybe the numbers.
Historically, ballot issues that are hard to understand are oftentimes thought to be voted down, because the prevailing thought is, if I don't understand it, I'll vote against it. The majority, I think it's fair to say, that the majority of those recommendations, charter modifications, have been adding commas, Oxford commas,
Oh,
and
sure.
they're very, very technical housekeeping things, with really not much impact.
Like changing the word from handicap to disability, that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Things like that, I think.
Just by them, it's curious, in the currently or in the past, have relatives of our mayors served on citizenry?
I'm not aware in my 7.5 years, Mr. Marsh, whether we've had that. Carrie's been here longer than I have. You aware of it?
But there is no prohibition
Correct.
or restriction, aside from the potential conflicts that are outlined in section 3.
I would be remiss, for my wife's sake, if I didn't say this shows the expanding role of women in our society. She would say about time, quite honestly, but it does show that, yes, I mean, there are active couples out there, certainly, and the Entenmans, as Mr. Danielson admitted also, they're a very civically active couple, so this probably is a good opportunity for you to render an advisory opinion on this type of issue.
Any other thoughts? I am concerned personally about trying to come up with a list of things that we want to say, if this happens, you must recuse yourself, because we could never make an inclusive list. So I don't think the board wants to get into that business. And I don't think we would be interested in that. And Jack, as you said, if there is no if there is no conflict simply by serving on the board, it's just a potential for conflict. And there's a potential for an ethics violation every day for every single person that walks the face of the earth. You know, anybody could do anything at any time, and we would have to deal with that when and if that happened.
I would say the appearance of a conflict isn't even present until something would come before the board that would be, again, in my opinion, that would be related to the mayoral election. Then, okay, then you have an appearance, and then if someone recuses themselves, they can dissipate that situation. That's how I'm processing this.
And traditionally, the appearance of impropriety is a decision made from the respondent's point of view, rather than, because you can't be charged with an ethics violation that says that appears to be wrong. You know, you could say as an individual, I'm going to not do something because it may appear to be unethical, so I'm going to avoid doing it. But absent that, I don't see how we could craft an advisory opinion on the appearance of impropriety. That's an individual decision on a case-by-case basis.
I agree with that, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. We can't create an exhaustive list, and it'd be difficult even to create some kind of categorical approach to it. As I look at the charter, you know, it seems to me that Article 3, talking about mayor's election and responsibility, would at least be a place to start. So, for example, if the commission entertains recommendations to change something that has to do with Article 3, I think at the least that would at least put a board member on notice that they should consider the implications of the appearance of impropriety.
And that would be for existing board members, excuse me, Senator. And I would guess if the mayor appointed a spouse to serve on a committee, that one of the city councilors would probably notice that and ask a question, and he would deal with it prospectively. So,
As I looked at the ordinance, it appears to me that the conflict of interest statute focuses on financial conflict. So there, so even changes to the charter having to do with the mayor's powers or something like that, I don't know how you would figure a financial conflict in that. I think we have citizen boards where there's more potential for it. We have some where I see absolutely none. There used to be at least a mayor's committee for citizens with disabilities. How, if the mayor's spouse served on that, I cannot conceive of a way there could be a potential financial conflict of interest. So as you were saying, we don't want a laundry list or to have a long list of examples, but could we just say when it appears that the spouse by their actions could impact there could be a financial impact that could be perceived as a conflict of interest. That's a time when they could recuse themselves. I can see other places where you could have the appearance of a conflict, but if it's not financial, it's really not addressed by our current ordinance, is my understanding.
Is that true though, Dave? I know you focused on financial, but the overriding provision that says to avoid the appearance of impropriety seems to be a much broader, the concern goes beyond financial.
Correct, that's the charter provision again, Mr. Jamalski, in terms of what is appropriate there. So that's the guiding principle where the ordinances came about, but there's not a specific ordinance that says should avoid even an appearance of impropriety. That's a charter provision that this board has used over the decades to give advisory opinions to say we would advise against doing this because it has an appearance of impropriety.
So the silly example would be if I'm on this charter and I entertain the recommendation to create a mayor who is dictator for life, right? Whether I have financial impact with that decision or not doesn't, to me, that's not a reason to ignore the appearance of impropriety, of course. So my point really is, as a member of this board, and Mrs. Entman, if I were faced with public input and a recommendation to change anything that had to do with the mayor or the election process relating to the mayor, I would lean toward being very cautious, at least from this board's position as an advisory opinion to recuse yourself.
So once again, we're faced with the determination of looking at the city charter, which talks of ethics in a principles-based situation, and the ordinances, which talks about ethics in a rules-based, and the two of those are very, very different. On the principles-based side, we talk about the hypotheticals. On the rules-based side, we deal with actual complaints. If there is a motion to issue an opinion, I would hear that. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion for dismissal of the complaint, and we can move on.
For purposes of discussion, and I would offer a very simple motion for consideration and discussion. That we do not find that there is an inherent conflict of interest when the spouse of the mayor serves on an appointed civic board.
The mayor or mayoral candidate.
That would be fine.
Thoughts on that, Carrie? Read that back for us.
Motion is that we do not find inherent conflict of interest with a spouse of a mayor or a mayoral candidate who serves on an appointed civic board.
Any other comments? Is there a second to that message? Hearing none, the motion will die for lack of a second. And we will move on. substitute motion or a motion for dismissal?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe there's a motion to dismiss a complaint when no complaint is filed.
Well, there is a complaint filed. I mean, is it the form?
If I may, Mr. Chairman, you've already converted it to a request.
Oh,
for
I'm
advisory.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Exactly.
So there's
Exactly
no
right.
complaint to dismiss.
You're exactly
Sorry.
right. So I'm sorry, you're good catch. The motion would be then to deny the request for an advisory opinion or accept the request and proceed.
Mr. Chair, just for the purposes of discussion, and to play off Jack's point, a motion perhaps to have Mr. Fifley draft an advisory opinion with 2 points in mind. One is that the spouse of a mayoral candidate serving on the board would not create an inherent conflict. And then second, our board's position on some kind of guidance to the extent that there is a conflict or a recommended change to the charter that relates to at least mayoral election or some of the powers in Article 3 of our charter.
That the person should recuse themselves?
Yes.
For those issues.
Which I like better because it speaks more directly to this paragraph in front of us presented by Mr. Daniels. I know we're issuing an advisory opinion, but I still feel a responsibility to address the specific issue that was presented, which I think your suggestion would.
And I'm more comfortable with this. The motion you previously presented said mayoral candidate or mayor. And I think there could be a difference there, and that's why I hesitated on that one. If a person is the mayor, I think there is possibly more potential for at least the appearance of impropriety. When a person is a candidate, that certainly does not guarantee they will become mayor. And so you just said mayoral candidate, and I'm more comfortable with that one.
Or even candidate for elected office, we want to broaden it.
But these are all mayoral appointments, aren't they?
With the advice and consent of the
Oh.
council. Yes.
We do have a motion, and we would need a second to proceed.
I would second that.
We have a motion and a second. Carrie, would you read that back for us, please?
I'm not sure if I got the whole thing this time, but I've got it. The first part of the motion was the spouse of a mayoral candidate serving on a board does not create a conflict of interest. And then the second part of it was a conflict or recommendation to change the charter, Article 3, that the person should then recuse themselves if it involved Article 3.
And the motion was to ask Mr. Fifley to draft an opinion.
Draft an opinion for
Cover those
an
two
advisory
points.
opinion.
I would feel more comfortable if it said inherent conflict of interest, because you've always got to leave room for a situation.
He did use that.
Did you? Okay,
So
okay.
I have that in my
Okay.
notes. Yep.
Right.
So if there's no further discussion, we have a motion and a second. Clerk has read back the motion. All those in favor signify aye. No?
No.
Motion passed. I would like to ask the board to consider whether or not, I think Mr. Danielson raises a really, really good point in that we have no format for someone to request an advisory opinion. We have a complaint form. Would it be beneficial for us to have a mechanism for the public to request an advisory opinion as opposed to a complaint, or is that going down a road where we don't want to go?
Anyone can request an advisory opinion, and that has been done probably hundreds of times over these decades, Mr. Chairman. So I'm not surprised that Mr. Danielson, as much as he's a watcher and observer of city government, that he would think he could only file a complaint when in fact citizens do file advisory opinions, especially relating to something like this.
I thought I'd seen that, that's why.
Oh, yes, very much so, hundreds of times.
And so you have forms?
That's, yes.
Okay, where are they available on your website?
Lisa.
In this board's section of the website?
Should be. I'll double check to make sure.
I
I'll
looked
check.
for them and I couldn't find it, so.
Yeah, they both should be out there, I know.
If it's not there, it would have been a glitch, because, yeah, it should be there.
All right, any other business or pending issues to come before the board? Hearing none, I entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Board is adjourned. Thank you for your help. Service. Now that we've ended, we can all thank David for his guidance and help.
That's what you
Thanks, John. It's been an honor to serve you, and you're my favorite clients, like any citizen board and volunteer.
Y'all come back now, dear. Security, escort this gentleman out, please.
Come on, Soda Pop, let's go.